As things are looking pretty bad for Democrats, the Republican Party could potentially expand the map. What is up, people of the internet? It is me, Real American, back in with a new video, and today we have to talk about the 2024 presidential election because it appears that the Democrat Party is suffering a complete and total collapse. Yeah, that's right. Despite what some Democrats may claim about the current state of the race, they are in deep trouble. Like, I am not exaggerating when I say they are suffering a possible DEFCON 1 level scenario. Yeah, it's that bad. And it's not just in one state. It's not just in one county. No. It's virtually every single state showing the same exact trend, aka a complete disaster for the Democrat Party. Now, I want to be clear that I am not saying that Donald Trump's going to win every state in a landslide. No, I'm not saying that at all. But these numbers are so bad for Democrats that at some point it becomes apparent that, yeah, the Democrat Party has a huge problem. And let's start with Clark County, Nevada. You know, the most important county in Nevada, this is where Las Vegas is. Look at this. In early voting on Sunday, Republicans won by 2,200 votes. And the quote-unquote firewall for Democrats is only 9,000 votes. For those that don't know, back in 2020, Clark County voted for Biden by roughly 91,000 votes. And I believe early voting, it was like D plus 80,000 or something like that. Right now, it's only Harris, or I should say D plus 9,000. This same state back in 2020 voted for Biden by not even 40 points. It was by 35,000 votes. Yet right now, Clark County, which is the county that will decide the election, right now, Republicans are barely losing the early vote there. And we're not talking about the election day vote. We're talking about early voting, which I know compared to 2020 and 2022, it will shift Republican. But no one, and I mean no one, thought this was going to happen, where Republicans were not only going to be somewhat competitive, but they were outright winning early voting some days. Now, will this continue? It's hard to tell because it could be a fluke, like, oh, it's just one really good day of early voting for Republicans in Clark County. Despite it being a very Democrat part of Nevada, in fact, really the only part of Nevada that's very Democrat outside of Reno, it's maybe a fluke. Maybe it's a one-off occurrence where maybe Republicans, they just had a really good day and Democrats, they had one bad day. But even then, there's a big problem with that theory. Clark County is not the only county we're seeing this trend in. And ignoring the other places in Nevada, you can look at any state, whether it's North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, any swing state, you're going to immediately notice that, oh, wait a minute, Republicans, they're surging not just in one state for a single day. No, they are surging everywhere. Look at Pennsylvania. Just a couple weeks ago, the early voting was roughly 73% Democrat. And everyone was losing their minds. But ever since then, every single day, not just one day, not just 2 days, every single day of early voting in Pennsylvania, it has become more and more Republican. On the 7th, it was roughly, 73% Democrat. As of the 21st, in just 2 weeks, not even 2 weeks, it's not even 63% Democrat. Republicans, they went from 19% of the vote to just under 28%. Yeah, a 20-point shift in just 2 weeks in Pennsylvania. And you look day by day, it's a consistent trend. And in fact, it's accelerating. Yeah, we're getting closer to Election Day, and the returns are becoming more and more and more Republican, not Democrat, not just one day of really good voting for Democrats or Republicans. No, it's a consistent trend every single day. And look at requests. Yeah, absentee requests in Pennsylvania have trended Republican every single day. So it's not just one county in Nevada that's really good for Republicans. No, It's any swing state. Look at any swing state, including a state like North Carolina, Georgia even, which I know Georgia doesn't have voter registration, but we know the demographics of these voters, and these voters seem very Republican. They seem like they're Trump voters. It's every single swing state. But why is this important? Like, okay, we've gone over this a million times. Early voting across the board looks good for Republicans. Like, actually really good. Like, we're talking about huge shifts from 2020 and even 2022, which some people have argued 2022 might be a better baseline. Because in 2020, everyone was using early votes. While 2022, we saw a clear trend that, oh yeah, Democrats more than likely we're going to use early voting. And I know the same thing occurred in 2020 where percentage-wise Democrats were more likely to vote early, but you could argue, well, maybe that was a fluke. In 2022, it's a clear trend that, oh yeah, Democrats are more likely to vote early, vote absentee, while Republicans, they're more likely to vote on election day. That's a fact. And well, in every swing state, it has shifted dramatically Republican. Even places like Clark County, which, if Clark County is shifting their Republican in early voting, Harris is in deep shit there. But you might be asking yourself, okay, what's so important about this? Like, okay, Trump is doing way better in early voting, voter registration, polling, that's another metric no one talks about. I mean, Trump's up by a couple points in every swing state, including Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, etc. It's like, yeah, this is all looking good for Trump, but what's the big deal? Like, okay, if we assume that Trump is up in the swing states, yeah, he's probably at, 312. So it's like, okay, what's the big deal? Why is it a big deal that Trump is doing so much better in early voting across the board? Well, it's because people are not talking about, it's not just happening in swing states like North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. It's happening everywhere, including deep Democrat states. Now, I want to be clear that I am not saying that Trump is going to win a state like New Mexico or Minnesota or Virginia. But in the last week or so, it's become apparent that the Democrats have a huge problem, not just in the swing states, but there's a chance that if things keep trending the way they are, they could be in trouble in a state like Virginia, Minnesota, New Mexico. And I know that sounds absolutely crazy, like, wait, what? Virginia, New Mexico, states that back in 2020 voted for Biden by 11 points, voted for Biden by 10, Minnesota, Harris plus 7. Even states like New Hampshire and Maine, well, they were Biden plus 9. I know it sounds crazy to say that if things continue, this could be a disaster for Democrats, but let's look at the current state of the race and how things are trending. Just look at the national polling. For starters, I mean, look at this. Just a couple weeks ago, it was Harris plus 2, and you look at the individual polls, it was consistently a Harris lead. Harris plus 2, Harris plus 3, Harris plus 4, Harris plus 1. Maybe a tied race or a Trump plus 2 here and there, but outside of that, it was a consistent Trump lead. But in the last week or so, there's been a clear trend against Harris. Look at this. In the last week, since the 14th, there's been nothing but Trump leads or very small Harris leads. Trump plus 2, Trump plus 3, Harris plus 1, Trump plus 3, Trump plus 1, Harris plus 1. Yeah, this is just the past week or so, since the 14th. Outside of those 2 Harris plus 1 polls, it's been a consistent Trump lead. And he's been surging in all the swing states, like Wisconsin. He went from losing it by a couple points to now outright winning Wisconsin. And for those that don't know, Wisconsin polling sucks. So for them to have Trump not only competitive, but to just outright win Wisconsin, that's a big deal. Same thing with states like Nevada, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. Every swing state right now on the RCP average, Trump is leading. And in the vast majority of them, they understate Trump's support every year by 2 to 3 points. But I would argue the most important thing is the trend. Like, Trump went from Harris, or it went from Harris plus 2 in Wisconsin a couple weeks ago to a Trump lead. Even the national polling right now Look at this. It was Harris +2, Harris +2. Now it's Harris +0.9. And that's with some big outliers from Marist, from Morning Compost, you know, the very shit pollsters. Which, if it wasn't for those outliers, we're probably talking about a statistical tie on the RCP average in the national polls. And if that's the case, ignore the fact that these same polls, they could actually be understating Trump yet again. If it's a tied popular vote, that's a 4 to 5 point shift from 2020. At that point, you're already talking about states like Virginia, Minnesota, New Hampshire, Maine, New Mexico being way closer than they should be. Not saying Trump's going to win those states, but assuming there's no polling miss whatsoever, right now you could argue maybe a state like Virginia, it could be within 5. Same thing with Minnesota. New Mexico, that's a little bit more difficult, but you get the point that a 4 to 5 point shift in the popular vote, you'd have to assume that at least a part of that comes from Virginia, which, by the way, we have early voting out of Virginia, and right now, just like every other update, it is not good for Democrats whatsoever. They had a slight gain today, but the thing is, it was actually less than they expected. People were expecting this to be a big swing towards them, and it was like 0.7, or not even 0.7, it's like 0.07% towards Dems, which is nothing. You see the problem here? Even the early voting, which it leans Democrat, compared to 21, 22, 23, it is a dramatic shift towards the GOP in Virginia. And the national polls, they indicate that it could be a tied race for the popular vote. But that's assuming there's no polling miss, which I'm not saying there's going to be. Or I want to be clear that I'm not saying for sure Trump's going to win the popular vote. But people got to realize that back in 2020, roughly in the same time frame, it was like Biden +10, Biden +9, and he ended up winning by 4.5 points. That's a 4-point miss. Back in 2016, it was roughly Clinton +7. She won by 2 points. That's an even bigger miss. That's a 5-point miss. In 2020 and 2016, in the national polls, in the same time period, like the middle of October, they understated Trump's support by 4 to 5 points. Even if it's half that, let's just say, okay, it's Trump +1 or 2 in the popular vote. Let's just say it's Trump +1 or 2. Let's just say Trump +2. If it's Trump +2, you're talking about a 7-point shift nationally. And at that point, you go back to the electoral map, and states like Minnesota, Virginia, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but states like even like New Mexico, Democrats could be in big trouble in. States like New Hampshire, Maine. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but if there's really a 7-point shift in the popular vote, which that's possible if the polls have the same polling miss, which it's entirely possible, especially with these shit Harris +5 polls. If there's even a 2-point miss, that's a 7-point shift from 2020. You're talking about states like Minnesota, Virginia, New Mexico, New Hampshire, Maine, potentially all flipping. Or at the bare minimum, like in New Mexico's case, probably leaning towards Harris. Like, it would be closer, but Harris probably wins it. But then something came out today that I think took everyone by complete surprise. The Democrat Party just announced they're spending money in New Mexico for the Senate race. Yeah, the DSCC, which controls funding for the Democrats for the Senate, they just announced they're spending money in New Mexico. Yeah, for the Senate race. New Mexico. And the funny thing is, a couple hours later, Rich Grenell, who is someone involved with the Trump campaign, he released a Harris +3 out of New Mexico. Now, listen, you have to take these polls with a grain of salt because they could be for fundraising, they could be completely fake, but isn't it very odd that the Trump campaign founded Harris +3 in New Mexico, and the very same day, the Democrats announced we are spending money in the state. We're spending money on the Senate race. Is that very strange? Like, wait a minute. The same morning the Trump campaign has a Harris +3, supposedly, you have Democrats spending money in the New Mexico Senate race. It's like, wait, hold up. What's going on here? And if this was in the middle of August And if this was going against a Republican incumbent, that's one thing. Like, okay, if this was middle of August or you're going to get an incumbent, that's one thing. That makes a little bit of sense. It's not July, it's not August, it's October. And not just the first week of October, it's late October. And you have an incumbent Democrat in the seat, in a state that you've won by 11 points back in 2020, but out of the blue, you're spending money here? When everyone suggests that this race is safe, it's like, wait, huh? That really makes no sense whatsoever. Unless maybe the polls out of New Mexico from the Trump campaign, maybe it's somewhat accurate. And maybe, just maybe, both campaigns are realizing that the Democrats are in deep trouble. That maybe the trends are so bad for Dems that they could be in trouble in places like New Mexico. And I'm not trying to get people complacent, but this does not look good for Dems at all. And on top of that, House Democrats just announced that they're canceling nearly $1 million in reservations against Brian Steele, who many Democrats were claiming that, oh, despite it being an R+2 district or whatever, Brian Steele could possibly go down. Yeah, the Democrat Party was trying to flip the seat. Yeah, they just announced they're cutting $1 million in reservations. Yeah, against Brian Steele. One of the few, well, there's been a bunch of House districts are targeting, but this was one that a bunch of Democrats thought that they could possibly flip. Yet, they're cutting their spending here. The same day they're spending in New Mexico. Now, this doesn't mean that, oh, Democrats are going to defend everywhere, but in the next week or so, if we see Democrats spending in Virginia, Minnesota, states like even New Jersey or whatever, that should tell you that they are actually in deep trouble. And that Harris +3 out of New Mexico, there might be some legitimacy to that claim, or that poll. And it could verify the claim that the race is trending against Harris. And both campaigns are starting to realize that, oh, wait a minute. The Harris campaign is falling apart as we speak, while the Trump campaign, they're picking up momentum at the right time. We'll see what happens, but if these polls and if these data points are anywhere close to accurate, Trump could possibly be expanding the map right now. Again, I'm not saying this for sure going to happen, but it makes you really wonder, why are Democrats out of the blue spending in New Mexico? We'll see what happens, but not a good sign for Dems if that's the case. Anyways, folks, thank you so much for watching. If you guys did enjoy this video, smash the like button down below, subscribe, share with your friends, hit that little bell, follow the social media accounts in the description down below, and of course, join the channel today. Godspeed to all of you.